He gets invited on Fox News to downplay the vaccines. This is a guy who last month I emailed him. He seemed to me to be one of the more prominent vaccine skeptics. I emailed him and said, give me your best case. Like I want to do right by these claims. Give me your best case against the vaccines. And he gave me a bunch of, falsifiable pieces of data about the vaccines. And I looked it up. And every single one of them was, in fact, false. Like every single thing he said that could be fact-checked turned out false. He was quoting scientists who, were doing research in Israel and Denmark, and saying that their conclusions were one thing. And then I would email them and say, oh, that's total horseshit. Like it was like in Annie Hall when Marshall McLuhan comes in and says, nothing of my work. It was like experiencing that moment over and over and over. So, just to take like one piece of misinformation that he spreads. He suggested in early January that countries like Israel were suffering from the early vaccine rollout. He said, we're seeing deaths and hospitalizations among the vaccinated population of Israel really grow. Like people are dying of this vaccine. Well, now fast forward 4 months, cases in Israel have declined by 99.5%. Daily deaths of COVID in Israel have declined to 1. Like clearly this vaccine works. And again, Israel is not the data set of Moderna or Pfizer or J&J. If you don't like those companies, if you don't like the profits that they get, just put that aside. Just look at countries like Israel and the UK, the world leaders in vaccines. They're achieving exactly the results we should want, which tells me these vaccines work, frankly, exactly as advertised.
They're the anti-vax extremists. Are there pro-vax extremists? Because this is usually how it works. We usually go the furthest on each side. Who are those people and what are they up to?
The pro-vax extremists.
That's a new group we need.
I'm not sure I came across yet that particular species. I'll keep an eye out for the pro-vax extremists. What I've seen, honestly, Bill, is, and maybe this is just my own selection bias. I've seen a lot of liberal people who live on the coast. I live in Washington, D.C., who are, to be quite honest, too afraid of the world that the vaccines give us. They still want to enforce outdoor mask mandates. They still want to keep indoor bars shut down. They still want to resist travel or tell us that we're going to have to wear masks around each other and maybe not have, open air weddings for months. I think you have a lot of people who have sort of wrapped up their social identity in following the rules. And it's been really clear for them for the last 15 months what those COVID rules were, and they're changing. They're changing because the vaccines change the rules as they should. And what I see, frankly, isn't people who are overly pro-vax, but people who took the vaccine but are still living as if it's September 2020 and not living as if it's May 2021. It's a new world. We should be getting out there and normalizing our lives. And frankly, advocating for people to normalize theirs. Because if we play up the benefits of these vaccines, then whenever anyone's making a little cost-benefit analysis, they're going to say, okay, the shot's worth it.
Do you think the fact that the CDC was so erratic in what they were telling us we should and shouldn't do those first 9 months has played into a mentality with certain people like, well, you guys have changed your opinion over and over again. Why the fuck should I believe you now?
So I talked to all these vax hesitant people last week, and it was interesting. I said, are you discouraged from taking the vaccines because of what people like Fauci are saying right now? And the answer they gave was really interesting. They said, no, I don't care what Fauci says right now because I stopped listening to him 6 months ago. So that group has really tuned out the entire public health establishment. Their thought is basically, again, I got this. My cells got this. I don't need the pharma group. And my brain's got this. I don't need to listen to liberal elites tell me what to think. I'm going to do my own research online on Twitter or whatever, right? That's their attitude. So the public health community lost them. Now, it's possible that there was no winning them. Maybe in a country that's like this, just sundered by political ideology and political polarization, and with Trump as president in 2020, there was just no chance that we were ever going to get to a sense of shared reality when it came to this virus. But the mistake that the CDC and other public health officials made, I think, is not to arrive at a clearer understanding of what this virus actually is. I've been a huge advocate of saying from the beginning, this is an indoor talking disease. It's an indoor talking disease. So avoid the indoors, avoid the unventilated indoors, avoid talking, because that's what produces those aerosolized particles that get people sick and other exerted breathing, like in gyms. Avoid the indoors, avoid talking, and otherwise live your life. If you want to go for a walk, do it. If you want to go to the beach, do it. If you want to play soccer or go on a bike ride, do it. Avoid indoor talking. And rather than take that message of here's a simple message that contains a lot of nuance in it, indoor talking, rather than take that approach, they took this sort of scattershot approach where they seem to be all over the place at once. People got confused about masks. They got confused about, does this virus spread on surfaces or not? By the way, it doesn't. They got confused about whether dining outdoor restaurants was good or bad. I think if we had arrived at this clearer explication of the disease earlier on, we would have allowed people to fill in the nuance themselves. And that would have been a clearer way to get people to really grok what the virus is and how it spreads.
Well, it's also the virus and the pandemic played on the more neurotic of a person you were in whatever respect. It was going to make you 100 times more neurotic. I mean, I have friends that still get packages and put them in the garage for 3 days before they touch the package and stuff like that. I know people who are still wiping down, food delivery and all that stuff. That stuff's still happening, even though, I mean, you were writing about this in January about this is not a hygiene disease. You're not
in July
touching a counter.
Year.
Yeah, you're not touching a counter and getting COVID. This is not how you get it. You get it from being in a hotel conference room with 20 other people standing around spitting on each other for 2 hours. Basically, this is how you get it. Those people, I just think are probably just going to be neurotic about a lot of different things, right? The pandemic plays into it, but
yeah, right. Yeah, the pandemic was in a way kind of like a steroid for our neuroses, right?
Yeah,
however
totally.
much neurosis you had, this pandemic was definitely going to juice it.
Well, and also if you were online all the time looking for conspiracies and stuff, like this is the perfect conspiracy story. It's got everything. It has big pharmacies. It has Bill Gates. It has pharmacies competing against each other to see who can get their thing to market. It has the whole
China.
thing. Yeah, you have China. You have the vaccines might have been ready when Trump was president. We don't know, but they clearly all of a sudden he lost and then all of a sudden they were ready. Like they have 40 things they can grasp onto. And I don't think that's helped either.
I think you're right. Right. It was a neurosis steroid, but it was really kind of a societal steroid. Like whatever you were dealing with in January 2020 was going to be accentuated by the end of that year. Whether it was neurosis, whether it was conspiracy theorizing, whether it was, some people's hatred of China or hatred of Trump, like everything was juiced, I think, by the stress of the pandemic. I think it's also fair to say on the issue of neurosis, I've been thinking a lot about like how the CDC is messaged throughout this pandemic. And I think they've just consistently been slow.
They suck.
They were slow to update on surface transmission of the disease, which is just, I think, bunk. They were slow to update on outdoor transmission of this disease, which again, I think is incredibly rare. People are focused on, wearing masks outside and wiping down packages. No, that's just not how this spreads. And the CDC has been really slow to update people on that. And the only thing that I would say in moderate fairness to the CDC, and it's not even that fair, is the CDC is always going to be over precautious, if we're honest with ourselves. If you Google eggs, salmonella, CDC, you will find a webpage on cdc.gov that discourages people from cooking eggs that have runny yolk, whether that's soft-boiled eggs or sunny-side-up eggs, because it wants to keep people from getting salmonella. Now, most of the time in a non-pandemic year, I don't go to cdc.gov in order to determine how I should cook my eggs. But the CDC is out there telling people, like, be careful how you cook your eggs. I think we're probably going to go back to a world where we aren't going to rely on the CDC to figure out how to live, whether we should go to restaurants, how we should breathe outside, and what we should wear on our face. We're probably headed back to that world over this summer. And it might just be inevitable that a public health institution is going to be overly precautious about how it orients its public through any crisis. And I think that unfortunately it's been slow to recognize its role in the pandemic, right? People are now going to CDC to determine how to live. And they're often getting advice that is, quite frankly, 9 months or more behind the scientific consensus.
You could feel it. What was it, last week or the week before, when they were like, hey, if you're vaccinated, you don't need to wear a mask outdoors anymore. And it's like, no fucking kidding, CDC, thanks. But for some people, that was a big deal. It's like, oh, cool, I don't have to wear a mask outdoors. It's like, yeah, that was the whole point of getting the vaccine. I think we talked about this last time you were on. From a PSA standpoint, I think they botched it. But in their defense, if we're looking at them like they're a sports team, like they're like the Yankees, their funding got completely annihilated over the last, 4 years with the last president. And this is the repercussions of that. When you're cutting money from something that's basic and essential, like the CDC, and the way we react to basically a pandemic, we're going to then react badly during a pandemic, which I think we did, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's totally fair. I think it's fair to say that the CDC's failures are downstream of political decisions over the last few decades, but also political decisions under the Trump administration that probably muzzled many of the very good scientists of the CDC. I think that's a totally fair interpretation. The only thing I would complicate just a little bit is that other countries' public health institutions got it on the money really quickly.
Yeah.
So you look at Japan, which has dealt with coronaviruses before. They dealt with SARS-1. They dealt with MERS, the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. They had this rule that they came out with in April called the 3 Cs: closed spaces, crowded places, close contact settings. They said, avoid the 3 Cs and otherwise kind of do you. That is a fantastic message. The 3 Cs were right. And they were right from the beginning. And so I think it's notable that, we're sort of running this randomized control experiment around the world. Who's doing better facing the same biological nemesis? And Japan just did a really fantastic job, I think, from the start, with their public health officials getting on the horn and saying, here's what the disease is, here's how you fight it, and here's how otherwise you can live a relatively normal life.
All right. So what would you say? Let's say I had a friend who, I don't know, 13-year-old daughter. And that daughter, as of this week, is now allowed to be vaccinated in California. And that person says, I'm not giving the vaccine to my daughter. I don't like some of the stuff I've read. I don't think she's in danger. Even if she got it, to her, it would be a cold. I don't really love the thought of vaccines. I don't think they've tested enough. I'm not going to get it for her. So what's your counter to that?
Yeah, my counter to that is twofold. First, it's, all right, let's assess the risk to your daughter if she gets this vaccine. And then second, let's assess the benefits to the community if she gets this vaccine. So first, the risk to the daughter. I am aware of no evidence that children face any serious risk from getting this vaccine. That's one reason why the Pfizer vaccine was recently approved for young teenagers. Second, on the benefits, there was this really, really interesting study, a CDC published study that came out of Kentucky, I believe, a nursing home, where someone who wasn't vaccinated and was sick with COVID went into the nursing home and spread the disease throughout a otherwise vaccinated population of old people. Now, because the vaccine is about 90% effective, 90% of these older people in the nursing home facility were protected and were totally fine. But about 10% of these old people in the nursing homes that had been vaccinated got sick, and a handful of them, I believe, died. So what does this story tell us about the social benefits of the vaccine? It tells us that even if you're healthy yourself, you're like a 13-year-old girl who faces a very minimal individual risk from this virus. If you get sick, you can still pass it on to a senior who's going to die of it. That's conceivable with a 90% effective vaccine, because that senior could be the 10%. So the best way to protect society, the best way to protect your family, your grandparents' friends, strangers who are dining with you at the McDonald's or the shopping in the Trader Joe's, the best way to protect them is to get vaccinated. So that's the story that I would tell this friend. This vaccine is minimally risky to your daughter. There's basically no risk that she's going to get hurt from it. And the benefits to the community in which she lives and the family that is us and our family friends, our older family friends, the benefit there is large enough that I would encourage teenagers to get the vaccination.
The whole risk thing is weird to me. And Now, granted, I'm a naturally risky person, so I'm not the greatest person to talk about this. But